And so my topic is variations in FIDIC contract, issues and approaches, specifically in Brazil. This is the Brazilian flag. Okay, so let's move on. And Brazil is the largest country in South America. You can see here the other countries are Argentina, Chile, Bolivia, Peru, Colombia, Venezuela, and some others. And although Brazil is bigger than the rest of them, FIDIC is less common in Brazil than in Peru, for example. And but it's starting to gain traction and to become more popular, the FIDIC contracts. And our legal system is civil law. It's not common law. It's civil law. What does it mean? That the written law is the primary source of law and prevails over secondary sources. So first, we need to resort to the civil code, right? Important, civil code. And we have subsidiarily our public procurement law, which we cannot overrule while we are drafting the FIDIC contract. We have to abide by the public procurement law, and we also have our arbitration law. Well, this being said, let's move on to a first conclusion, that FIDIC clauses cannot prevail over these legal elements because there is this hierarchical level. And so our civil law, our civil code is the primary source. Okay. In FIDIC books, variations is clause 13. I'm sure everybody here is acquainted with FIDIC contracts, but we saw a slight, or not so much slight, not so slight, a change from the 1999 version to the 2017 version. And what we saw in terms of changes, in terms of improvements, in terms of adjustment. First, broader variation definitions in the 2017 edition. Second, the simplified valuation method increased emphasis on notification dash documentation and an enhanced value engineering mechanism. Also, a removal or relaxation of the percentage limits allowable for variations. This is important, and as we take a look on that, now we are going to focus on our Brazilian situation that can be common to you in your country, in your business, in your career. Okay? So first, and I want you to pay attention to this. Okay. The procurement law has this number here, but it doesn't matter to you, okay? But this is the law, the national law. And it says, important for the FIDIC practitioner, contractor must accept in the same contract conditions, it means in the same price that was contracted, additions or deletions up to these limits. So our procurement law defines two different limits depending on the situation. The most common one is this one, 25%, right? So the owner and the contractor can make additions or deletions up to 25%. And important, up to 25%, the price has to be maintained. We cannot change unit prices. And there is a second hypothesis, which is conceived by our law, that is a limit of 50% in case this is not a greenfield project. This is not a construction from zero. If it is a renovation, a restoration, a retrofit, then the law allows this variation limit to be raised to 50%. Why is that? Because in a renovation or restoration project, the contractor and the owner are more likely to find surprises, to find unexpected situations. And so it would be rather complicated to keep the limit in 25%. So the law accepts up to 50%. This is clear, it's easily to understand, but when we go to a real project, and I was the engineer in one of these projects, and we had this situation. I want you to think with me. This is a question. What is the limit? Let's think together. What's the limit in case the project's scope is not only construction and not only renovation? For example, an existing airport that needs to be expanded. And so there is an existing portion and a new portion. And so what's the limit? This became a big issue here with the courts and lawyers and engineer, owner, contractor. What? And so a first answer would be the average, 37.5. But some people said, oh, but we have more expansion than restoration. And so we had to do a weighted average to come up with the number. But the best solution is what we came up after we thought a lot and had lots of discussion. We changed the bill of quantity in two. We split the bill of quantities, one for the existing project and another one for the expansion. That was a clever solution, but that had to be implemented during the project, with the project going on. And so this is a lesson learned. If we had thought this at the beginning of the project, it would have been, I would say, easier to manage this, right? And there is something that it's, I don't know if it's right or wrong. In my opinion, sometimes I think it's right, sometimes I think it's wrong. Okay, if I add, this is what the law says here. If I add 10% and I delete 10%, this does not mean a zero variation. It means a 20% of variation. And so this is cumbersome, but this is what the law says. When we open for discussion, for questions and answers, I would like to hear from you what is the rule in your country, in your real situation. So if I had to add excavation and delete, let's say, backfill, then we have to account for both percentages to come up with the final percentage value and compare to either 25 if it's a new project, or 50 if it is a renovation restoration. Let's move on to major issues, okay? You contract manager, you owner, you engineer, you contractor, please pay attention. So let's take the 25% limit, okay? Many owners and contractors see that limit as we call here, a license to kill. What does it mean? That owners and contractors take for granted that they have a margin of 25% to increase, decrease, change scope, add things, change specifications, increase the length of a power line, or increase things in a public school, for example. And so this is dangerous, okay? Why? Because 25% doesn't mean that you have to add 25% to your contract. But most of the owners and contractors think that, oh, my contract is 100, I will end up with a $125 contract. Second issue, variations. The variation limits are used Okay, what's the essence underlying variation? To make owner and contractor to make it possible for owner and contractor to make adjustments, but we cannot make adjustments randomly. And I will give you an example. Some owners here in Brazil acknowledge that the design they have is poor. They have only a preliminary design, but they do the tender stage and they hire the job based on the poor design. And they know it, but they are in a hurry to get the contract awarded and adjudicated because of politics and all this. But they look at the 25% and they say, oh, well, that's okay. We can hire the job, we can do the tender with this poor design because I have 25% to accommodate these adjustments. This is not good practice, okay? The good practice is to have a good design because that will mitigate lots of issues further on. And some warnings. I have two warnings for the FIDIC practitioners. The first one, variations cannot be used to alter the essence of the scope. This was something that I saw here in my city, in the town where I live. The project was to build, among other things, a concrete bridge, okay? A long concrete bridge. But then owner and contractor and the engineer decided to change it to a steel bridge. This is not allowed. Why? Because this distorts the balance during the tender stage, right? Because during the tender stage, we were in a competition to build what? A concrete bridge, not a steel bridge. And so this is a situation very common here in Brazil, but this is not allowed. Also, see how funny things are. The contractor who changed this from concrete to steel, if the tender was to build a steel bridge, that contractor would not be allowed to win because they didn't have because that contractor didn't have a track record of steel bridges. And so this is something that needs to be taken into account. And the second warning, I'm finishing, okay? The second warning is that the engineer should treat a 1% variation with the same degree of attention, of rigor, as a 25% variation. Why am I saying this? Because I sometimes see that when it's a small variation, usually the engineer is not so strict. And when it's a 15, 10% variation, the engineer opens the book, goes to the clauses of determination, reads clause 13, the engineer becomes more technical, but it should be the same thing. And finally, I would like to raise my personal questions regarding value engineering, which is also clause 13, 13.2 subclause in FIDIC, about the sharing of savings. Okay, in 1999 edition, we read 50-50. 27, it says it's negotiable. Okay, I haven't seen. Let me go to the question first. Have you seen shares older than 50-50? That's a question a client asked me here in Brazil. Here in Brazil, I haven't seen, but maybe you know. And what is the big issue here is how to assess the saving, okay? If it's the saving just in the construction phase, that's not so difficult. That's easy because we can make the takeoff and see how many cubic meters of concrete, how many cubic meters of excavation, and so on. But if the gain for the owner is during the operational lifetime of that asset, so it becomes more difficult to assess the share, and how to pay for this share. Okay, so this is my conclusion, that the FCT and FCCM, the contract manager, must be aware of the importance of clarifying the concept and mechanics of variations to owners and contractors, and I would add to the engineers as well.
This is about the variation order. In new FIDIC 2017, reprinted 2022 with some update. And here mentioned very clear that the engineer may instruct a variation by giving notice and stating any requirement for the recording of cost to the contractor in accordance with subclause 3.5 engineer instruction. And then the contractor, but now this is 3.7 in the newest edition. The contractor shall proceed with execution of variation and shall within 28 days for other period proposed by the contractor and agreed by the engineer of receiving the engineer instruction. Contractor should submit to the engineer detailed particular including the contractor proposal. I take only C, number C, the contractor proposal for adjustment to the contract price by valuing the variation in accordance with clause 12, measurement and valuation, with supporting particular, of course, which shall include identification of any estimated quantities, and if the contractor incurs or will incur costs as a result of any necessary modification to the time for completion, shall show the additional payment, if any, to which the contractor considers that the contractor is entitled. You can see this one, variation, and then also the second is variation by request for proposal. The engineer may request a proposal before instructing a variation by giving notice to the contractor, and the contractor shall respond to this notice as soon as practicable by submitting proposal or giving reason that the contractor cannot comply because maybe the material cannot be found in the market. And if contractor submit a proposal, the engineer shall, as soon as practicable, after receiving it, respond by giving notice to the contractor, stating his or her consent or otherwise. The contractor shall not delay any work while awaiting a response. It is very, very clear that there is two kinds of variation, two procedure of variation. And then in Indonesia, we have this Presidential Decree number 16, year 2018, Article 54. This is mentioned like this. in the event that there are discrepancies between the field conditions during implementation and the drawings and or technical specification or TOR stipulated in the contract documents, the PPK together with provider may make contract changes, which include PPK mean the project manager. First, adding or reducing the volume stated in the contract. Number B, adding and or reducing the type of activities. C, changing technical specification according to the field condition and or changing the implementation schedule. And number two, in the event that the contract changes are referred to in paragraph 1, result in an increase in the contract value, the contract changes shall be carried out with the provision, this is very important, that the final contract value increase does not exceed 10% of the price in the initial contract. This is very interesting. This has always become an argument because, as explained by Aldo, percentage is sometimes it's not easy to interpret. People will interpret as what his how to say, his thinking. We also have the decree, presidential decree number 192, year 2014. It is very clear that in Indonesia, and it is the same in other countries, especially in Brazil, there is also very strong position and power of the auditor, and sometimes very famous Operação Lava Jato. Yeah, Aldo, is that right? It is very difficult because there is a car wash investigation. Investigation because of they suspect that the project manager and maybe the contractor doing wrong. And this is the problem in us. And then based on this president decree, the deputy for investigation of the national auditor is tasked with assessing the head of the institution, the head of so-called national auditor, to supervise the smooth implementation of the development, including cross-sectoral program, corruption prevention, price adjustment audit, claims audit, investigative audits of cases or irregularities that indicate financial losses to the state. This is also very hard. Audits of the calculation of the state financial losses and providing expert testimony. But they still consider they will invite expert to assist them because they mostly are an accountant and not the engineer. So they need assistance from the engineer. The coordination of internal supervision of planning and implementation activities that may hinder the smoothness of development, including cross-sectoral program. That is their job. And then implementation of audits on price adjustment, claims audit, and investigative audit of cases of irregularities that indicate financial losses of the state. This is sometimes create a problem because we have a contract, and I think the same with the other civil countries, that there is also a regulation, the civil code. We will discuss about the civil code after this one. And this is very clear that we have very strong national auditor for the government project who will come and check everything. And then another presidential decree, 2020, the Deputy Attorney General for Civil and State Administration Affairs has the duty and authority to carry out the duties and authorities of the prosecutor office. So we have two supervisors, two auditors. First is the national auditor, and this is the prosecutor, national prosecutor. So that is before, it's just very complicated, but after that, I try to do something to work with them and establish the collaboration with the auditor and explain, because they mostly also, in that case, the first national auditor is mostly accountant, but the attorney office mostly a lawyer. It is not easy. Yeah. how to marry the opinion of accountant, lawyer, and engineer. But I'm happy that we successfully gathered them in the international conference in Jakarta last year. Chung also attended the conference. It is very good atmosphere because finally we can understand the meaning or the target of the construction project is to complete the project without any administrative matter left. They understand that one. I have just one short example, but I will not mention the name of the project, which is sometimes it is restricted to open. In the construction project constructed under FIDIC condition of contract for construction, MDB Harmonized Edition 2010, during the implementation of the project, it was found that one section, which is very important from a structural engineering point of view, would hamper the stability of the building structure without any new additional part of the construction. And this is not easy. Then after explaining that because the amount is more than 10% of the contract value, initial contract value. After explaining to the institution responsible for auditing, with complete structural engineering justification, it was agreed to allow the additional cost of more than 10%, with some additional administrative procedure required cost. Now, the project manager still at site still not allowed to instruct more than 10%, but if it is actually needed for the structure itself, they can ask for permission to central government. Okay, thank you. Come on, Sanlak, obrigado.
The topic that we'll be discussing is the Islamic Development Bank standard bidding document for major works, and specifically a provision on the limit on the right to vary. So the SBD for major works, this is a harmonized standard bidding document between the most of the MDBs. They've been using it for around about 20 years. And it's more or less the same for all the MDBs. There's only minor changes that are specific to each MDB. Let me start. I think you have the presentation already, so I'll go straight to the first slide. Let me start at the beginning with the in August 2020. So we signed the license agreement with FIDIC for use of the 2017 suite. So previously, this standard bidding document was using the 2010 Pink Book. So the license agreement that was signed in August 2020 is very similar to what the other MDBs have signed. So basically, it gives us a right to refer to the FIDIC 2017 books in our standard bidding documents. It also gives us the right to develop the what is called the conditions of particular application. This is how they refer to in the license agreement, basically the particular conditions of contract. And these COPA, they remain the copyright of the bank. So immediately after signing the license agreement, we started work on updating the bidding document. So it took us about 2 months, and then we stopped. We took the old bidding document out of circulation, which was using the Pink Book. So we stopped using the Pink Book. And this bidding document was launched in October 2020 for our executing agencies, the ministries in the various countries where we work. And basically, the COPA or the particular conditions of contract, they were based on the 2010 Pink Book with updates to account for the changes between the 2010 Pink Book and the 2017 Red Book. And this is when we introduced this provision on the limit to right to vary. So basically, this has been in use now for about just over 4 years. And some of the rationale or the reasons really for introducing this provision. So the variation provision, this is a very useful provision, as we all know. So it allows us to really take account of changed project circumstances. If we find unforeseen conditions in the foundations, we can change the design. If we discover mistakes or shortcomings in the specifications or the design, we can take care of that. So it's intended really to improve project outcomes. However, we all know very well that there are some negative aspects associated with variations, and this could include during actual implementation, project delays, cost overruns, claims, disputes, and what I call excessive variations. I think all of us must have noticed this on some project or other, and sometimes it could be actually to poor geotechnical investigations and inadequate detailed designs, as just mentioned by my colleagues. In addition, in the context of multilateral development bank financing or MDB financing, there can also be other negative aspects. This could include the need to arrange supplementary financing, extension of last date of disbursement, higher administrative cost for the bank, and also a higher repayment burden for the employer. The borrower, we call the borrower the beneficiary in our terminology. So there could be all these negative aspects. And let me just clarify this very quickly through this graphic, which shows a typical financing timeline. And infrastructure financing is long-term financing. So normally we have the maximum tenor is 20 years. You should excuse me, I'll be using financing terminology here, not contractual terminology. So the tenor is a maximum of 20 years. This includes normally 5 years as a gestation period, which is basically the period for implementation of the project, and then a repayment period of 15 years. So this implementation period for the project of 5 years, it would be marked at the end by what is called the last date of disbursement, when the disbursement on the financing comes to an end or should come to an end. And then the actual amounts that are disbursed are calculated, and a repayment schedule is developed and agreed between the two parties, the bank and the beneficiary or the borrower. And then the repayment installments are basically calculated and spread over the 15-year period at semi-annual intervals. So there would be 30 repayment installments. Sometimes we do get requests for large variations towards the end of the project, and they could cause considerable delay. So here in the example, I'm showing like a 2-year delay. And what this would mean is that we need administrative procedures for extension of the LDD. And also there could be a need, if the project funds have been exhausted, the financing is exhausted, there could be a need to arrange supplementary financing, and these administrative procedures could take several months. Of course, there would be a higher administrative cost for the bank because administering the financing, has some administrative cost. There could be a slightly higher financing cost for the beneficiary because the disbursements made during the gestation period, they incur a small financing cost. But really, the biggest negative aspect for the borrower is that the repayment period would be shortened. So in this case, instead of 15 years, it would be reduced to 13 years. And therefore, the repayment installments, would increase by that proportion. So other reasons, really other aspects and reasons for introducing this provision. So I think just mentioned by Aldo, is that there really is a limit on variations that we need to take into consideration. So major international legal systems, they stipulate limits on variations that can be instructed by the employer engineer. I think Aldo summarized it really very succinctly. He said that you cannot really alter the essence of the scope. You cannot fundamentally change the scope. And this is what major legal systems are saying. This is, you can say, a qualitative limit. It's not a quantitative limit. It's not expressed in terms, in percentage, as a percentage of the accepted contract amount. And also we know that in FIDIC, in the right to vary in clause 13, under subclause 13.1, there is no percentage limit on variations. What is there in 13.1, in the GCC, there are 3 circumstances where the contractor may not be bound by variation instructed by the engineer. The contractor can object. And one of these circumstances, the first one mentioned in that subclause, is if the varied work is unforeseeable, having regard to the scope and the nature of the work described in the specification. So this wording by FIDIC actually seems to refer to the legal limit, because what do you mean by varied work that is unforeseeable having regard to the scope? It means that this is work that is outside the intended scope. And this is very similar to the legal limits. I will elaborate these legal limits in the upcoming slides. But basically what we have done here by introducing this provision in the standard bidding document, we have actually converted a legal limit into a contractual provision expressed as a percentage of the accepted contract amount. And this makes sense. Why? Because if you cannot legally instruct work that fundamentally changes the scope, then just by pure common sense, the more the accepted contract amount changes, whether increase or decrease, then the more likelihood that you are actually fundamentally changing the scope. This was the logic actually behind this provision, why we expressed it as a percentage of the accepted contract amount. The question is, how was this done? Let's look at the general conditions of contract, subclause 13.1. So it says here, I quote on the left-hand side, variations may be initiated by the engineer under subclause 13.3 at any time before the issue of the taking over certificate for the works. And then it goes on to say the contractor shall be bound by each variation instructed under subclause 13.3.1. And on the right-hand side, what we have said in the particular conditions part B, specific provisions, under subclause 13.1, of course, we said add the following paragraph at the end of this subclause. The contractor shall not be bound by any variation instructed under subclause 13.3.1 if the cumulative value of variations exceeds the limit specified in the contract data as a percentage of the accepted contract amount. However, and I'm putting a focus on this, the parties may agree on an addendum to the contract with the value in excess of this limit. So this is emphasized to indicate that this is not an absolute limit, because the parties may agree on a contract modification or contract addendum with a value in excess of this limit. So if you look at part A of the particular conditions, which is the contract data, so this is where you have to insert this limit when you are preparing the bidding document. So it says under subclause 13.1, limit for right to vary is, there's a blank space, percentage of the accepted contract amount. And we put some guidance there in the contract data. It says the limit should be assessed for each contract individually based on the level of uncertainty inherent in each project. For example, for properly designed building works, the uncertainties are low, and the limit may be set at, say, 10 to 15%. For civil engineering works, the uncertainties would be higher. The limit could be, say, 20 to 30%. For highly uncertain works, the limit could be as much as 40 to 50%. So this is not a fixed limit. It's not one value. It's actually a flexible limit. It's assessed for each contract individually based on the level of uncertainty. And some of the factors that we mentioned, 3 factors here, the type of works, the level of detail in the tender design, the amount or quality of information from the site investigation. And basically what we are saying is you have 3 levels of uncertainty, low, medium, and high. And the various types of works, they fit, I think, quite clearly into these categories. So building works, normally they are of low uncertainty, and civil engineering, sort of medium, and tunneling, this is highly uncertain works. And in the column on the right-hand side, these are the suggested limits on the right to vary 10 to 15% for low, 20 to 30% for medium, and 40 to 50% for high. These are suggestions. Again, they are not cast in stone. you really need to exercise your judgment, look at your project when you are preparing the bidding document, and also very importantly, use your experience. You could be a contract manager working for a consultant, for example, or working for an employer organization. Let's say you have a road project in front of you, you are finalizing the bidding document, and your organization has completed, let's say, 7 or 8 road projects within the last 5 years. You can look up the completion reports for these various projects and see what levels of variation actually occurred on these various projects. So your professional experience really, whether from your personal projects or from the organization projects, would also be utilized really to set the limit. So I wanted to elaborate a little bit on the legal rationale again, because this is very important to explain some of the operational or project management considerations. But the legal rationale played a very important part in the thinking. So over the years, I have studied actually construction law under the 3 major international legal systems, mainly the common law or English law, civil law, and also Islamic law. So I'm speaking here from Saudi Arabia. And here in the MENA region, in the Middle East region, Islamic law is quite prevalent in many of the countries in the Middle East. And the construction market here is quite big. So you may need to know a little bit about Islamic law if your organization or you personally come to the MENA region to work here. So let me start first with English law. Many of you will have heard of Professor John Uff. He is a British engineer who went on to become a barrister and lawyer. And he was the first one to introduce a postgraduate construction law program at King's College London. And he has this classic textbook called Construction Law. And this is an extract from that book. He's saying, contracts do not usually place any limit on the permissible extent of variations. However, it is thought that there will always be some limit to what may be added to the contract. If work exceeding such limit is ordered, the contractor may be entitled to be paid for the whole of the works on a quantum wherewith, that is, at reasonable rates, on the basis that the original contract has ceased to bind the parties. And Professor John Uff goes on also to quote a UK court case where the judge actually gave a judgment on to this effect. So he said that the variations, this is the judge speaking, the judge said that the variations on this particular contract were such of the extent that such they could not have been within the contemplation of the parties. And therefore, the prices on which the contract has been based no longer bind the parties. So the contractor is entitled to be paid on this quantum wherewith, which means that really new rates, reasonable rates for the work that has been actually implemented, not the work that was agreed in the contract, the work that was actually implemented, the contractor will be paid at reasonable rates that will be set. And this is very dangerous. What this means is that you could have variations to the extent that the whole basis of the foundation of the contract really could be wrecked, so that and this will create a dispute. Inevitably, this will create a dispute because the contractor will be wanting a revision on the rates, and the employer will be resisting, and then you'll find out that this was due to excessive variations. You'll only find this out, unfortunately, if you go to an arbitration tribunal or to the court. So civil law, I think Aldo has saved me the trouble. I'll just very quickly just mention this quote from the Egyptian Civil Code. And it says that the contract is the law of the parties, and it is not permissible to rescind or amend it except with the agreement of the two parties or for reasons stipulated by the law. This is normally a very strict general principle that applies to all contracts. And what this means is that the right to vary in construction contracts is actually an exception to this general principle. Now, I mentioned the Islamic law. This will be actually the third major international legal system. As I said, it's prevalent in many countries here in the Middle East. And we find that the first point is that actually there is agreement here between Islamic law and English law because excessive variations may actually invalidate a construction contract. And as I just mentioned, this means that the rates agreed in the contract will no longer be applicable. And then most likely or almost inevitably, you will have a dispute. The second point, there's additional guidance here, and this is very interesting. It says that the limit on variations is dependent on the uncertainties inherent in each contract, and this is actually, we got the inspiration from here actually for this provision that we introduced in the standard bidding document. And lastly, it says that the limit on variations is determined by custom. What this means is custom means actually recognized good practice. And in practical terms, what this means is that it is the professionals that actually can decide on the limit. What is a reasonable limit of variations for this contract? So just as a summary, I would say that the major international legal systems, the common law, the civil law, and the Islamic law, they have common ground here, which basically you can summarize by saying that you cannot instruct a variation that fundamentally changes the scope of the contract or changes the essence of the contract as expressed by Aldo just a few minutes ago. So let me just very quickly reiterate and summarize the legal principles. The general legal principle is that contracts are formed by agreement of the parties and can only be amended by agreement of the parties. The right to vary is an exception to this legal principle. Exceptions have limits. It cannot be that we have a contract that is entered into by agreement of the two parties, and then one party has the right to vary the scope of the contract without limits. This does not make sense, and this could be subject to misuse. I'm not saying misuse by all, it could be misused by a few, and the law is here to prevent misuse. So that's why limits to variations are defined by the governing law. And just mention that I believe the major international legal systems, they stipulate limits, and these limits are expressed in qualitative terms. What we are saying is that it could be good practice actually to make the parties aware of this limit through appropriate provision in the particular conditions of contract. So let me clarify this a little bit further. I have about 7 minutes remaining. So on just a couple of slides, 2 or 3 slides left. Let me clarify this limit. So we all know that variations can be of two categories, variations by agreement. And what I mean by this is that there could be a variation proposal that is initiated by the engineer or a value engineering proposal initiated by the contractor. So this is discussed. If the parties agree, then the variation order is formally issued by the engineer. Variation orders also could be by instruction, instructed by the engineer, and the cost and time implications, they can be determined later after the VO is actually issued. So if you have variations below the limit, there is no issue here. You can issue variation orders either by agreement or by instruction. What this provision is doing, if you have variations above the limit, what we are actually limiting, we are saying that variations should be by agreement and should not be by instruction. This is the limit that has actually been introduced by this provision. And let me clarify this a little bit further by taking a hypothetical project. Let's call it Project X. So 2 scenarios. First scenario, Project X is well prepared, means there's a good geotechnical investigation, there's a good design. So let's call the scope of Project X 100%. So this scope actually is equivalent to the is described in the bill of quantities. So this 100% would actually be equivalent to the accepted contract amount. You are preparing the bidding documents, and you want to actually set the limit for variations according to this provision. It's a well-prepared project. you look at previous projects that have been executed, you find that you have on similar projects, variations were between 5 to 12%. They were good projects. So you say, okay, let's put this one at 15%. I would suggest to go to the higher end of the, if you identify a range, let's say 10 to 15%, go to the higher end of the limit because we don't want to be too restrictive. So you set this limit at 15%. Now the second scenario is project X is poorly prepared, and if it's poorly prepared, then there would be many components in the project that have not been designed properly. Therefore, I would expect that the bill of quantities would be less. So here I'm saying, let's say the project scope is 80%, and you look at this, and let's say you set the potential limit of variations up to 35% because you really expect difficulties on this project. So basically, the project in the two scenarios, it would end up roughly at the same at the same level, which is about 115%. But on the second scenario, the poorly prepared project, I mean, most likely you will have trouble, you will have claims, you will have disputes because of the extent of variations. What this provision is doing is actually implicitly defining the scope of the project. Why? Because we are saying that there should be no instructed variations beyond the limit that is stipulated here in the contract. There can be contract addendums by agreement. So this is actually implicitly and not explicitly defining the scope because we are saying no variations should fundamentally alter the scope. And the project scope is actually A plus B by implicit definition. Why? Because we know that the confirmed scope in the contract is A, and we also have an agreed variation clause, which means that there's a potential for variations to a certain limit. And so these are at the option, you can say at the option of the employer. So you have a confirmed scope and you have optional or potential scope. So we are saying this optional or potential scope should be defined such that we have, a clear idea of the overall project scope. And we have the experience. As experienced contract managers, what we are saying is experienced contract managers should be able actually to estimate the scope from their experience. And therefore, instead of leaving it open, have a well-defined limit here. And we still have the ability by agreement only to instruct variations outside of this scope. So let me just summarize here. So this provision is not expected to be invoked on a day-to-day basis. This is not for the day-to-day management of the contract. This provision is intended pre-contract, really to focus attention. You need to have better site investigations. You need to have better designs. During implementation, the provision is intended to give sufficient flexibility to the employer, but at the same time, limiting what we called excessive variations, which were not contemplated in the original scope. And I have defined here what we mean by this is that we have the original confirmed scope and we have the potential variations. This is the original scope. Outside of this, this has not been contemplated by the parties. And however, if it is absolutely necessary, variations are intended to be used when necessary. If it is absolutely necessary, actually to go above this defined limit in the contract, please do this via contract addendum, do this by agreement between the two parties and not by instructed VO. And therefore, we expect, to have fewer disputes, smoother and faster contract implementation. And just to finish, this provision has been used now for about 4 years. We've had a number of contracts actually using this road projects, for example, in Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, so on. I see that it's actually been understood. The limit is being set for road projects around about 20%, which means that actually it's being understood and so far it's being applied properly. Thank you very much, and I'll stop here and back to you, Trung. Thank you for your attention.